The arrow took the peddler's hat clean off his head, and Wesley Fletcher dropped to his knees behind his cart a half-second before the second one buried itself in the wood where his throat had been. "Bandits!" he shouted, though he doubted anyone within the walls of Thornmere Keep could hear him over the wind screaming off the cliffs. Below the switchback trail, 6 riders in mismatched leather and stolen mail were closing fast, and his mule had already bolted, taking half his trade goods with it down the slope in a clatter of pans and rope. He had one knife. He had never been a fighting man, not really. A trader knew roads, not sword work, and his hands were built for counting coin and coaxing better prices out of stubborn innkeepers, not for combat. He pressed his back to the cartwheel and tried to remember every prayer his mother had ever taught him, and found that his mind had gone entirely, uselessly blank. Then the gate of Thornmere Keep groaned open above him, and something came down the cliff road like the mountain itself had decided to walk. She moved faster than anything her size should have been able to move, green-skinned and broad-shouldered, black hair bound back in a thick braided rope that swung like a whip with every stride. She wore fitted warrior's leathers, dark and oiled, laced tight up the sides and reinforced with iron rivets across the chest and forearms, cut close enough to show every hard line of muscle beneath leathers built for a body that had never once needed to hide itself. A curved falchion was already in her hand before she'd cleared the last 20 feet of trail, and she did not shout a warning. She simply arrived. The first rider never saw the blow that took him from his saddle. The second wheeled his horse to flee, and she caught the reins with her bare hand, hauled the beast sideways with a strength that should not have belonged to anything walking on 2 legs, and put the man on the ground hard enough that he did not get up again. The other 4 scattered like crows off a corpse, and within the space of 10 frantic heartbeats, Wesley Fletcher was alone on the cliff road with an orc woman standing over him, breathing hard, her falchion dripping into the dust, and the most striking eyes he had ever seen in his life fixed directly on his face. "You are still alive," she said. It was not quite a question. Yes, thank you." That was he got to his feet, legs unsteady, and found he had to look up quite a distance to meet her gaze properly. That was extraordinary. She looked at him the way a woman might look at a stray dog that had wandered into a war camp, not unkindly, but entirely without expectation that it would prove useful. "You are the traitor," she said. "Fletcher. Wesley Fletcher. Yes, you know my name. Everyone at Thornmere knows the peddler who comes twice a season with needles and salt and lies about how far he walked to bring them." A ghost of something that might have been amusement crossed her face, gone before he could be sure of it. "I am Sharamph Ironblood. I do not know why you are still standing in the road instead of thanking me properly and getting inside the gate before the rest of them regroup." He looked down at his overturned cart, his scattered goods, the mule now a distant speck fleeing toward the tree line, and felt the absurd urge to laugh. "My mule appears to have made better decisions than I have today." That earned him something closer to a real smile, quick, sharp-edged, gone in an instant, but real. "Then follow me, traitor, before you make another bad one." He followed her up the cliff road toward the great gray walls of Thornmere Keep, and he did not yet know that he had just met the only woman he would ever want to walk beside for the rest of his life. Thornmere Keep had once been a monastery, built 3 centuries past by monks who wanted to be as far from temptation as stone and cliff and salt spray could put them. It perched on the edge of the northern coast where the land simply stopped, dropping 400 feet to black rocks and white water, and the wind never fully died even in the height of summer. When the old religious order had faded, the keep had passed to the border lords, then to no one at all for 2 generations, until Captain Aldrich Vane had claimed it as a garrison to hold the coast road against raiders coming up from the wild orc territories to the north. That had been 15 years ago. Sharamph Ironblood had come to Thornmere only 3 winters past, a lone warrior exiled from her own clan for reasons she told no one, and Captain Vane, desperate for anyone who could hold a blade against the raiders that plagued the coast, had taken her in over the furious objections of half his garrison. She had earned her place the only way she knew how, by being better than every man who challenged her, and by never once losing a fight that mattered. Wesley learned all of this over the following days, mostly from the keep's cook, a gossiping old woman named Myrna who seemed to know everyone's business and delighted in sharing it. He learned that Sharamph trained every dawn on the practice yard alone, because none of the garrison soldiers would spar with her twice. He learned that she ate alone, slept alone, and walked the cliff paths alone at night when she could not sleep. He learned that the men respected her and feared her in equal measure, and that not one of them had ever dared to walk beside her rather than behind her or ahead of her, because to walk beside Sharamph Ironblood was to claim an equality that no one at Thornmere believed any man deserved to claim. Wesley found this fact curiously sad, though he could not have said why it settled into his chest the way it did. He stayed at Thornmere longer than he'd planned, in part because his mule had genuinely run off with half his trade goods and needed recovering, and in part, though he did not admit this to himself for several days, because he found himself watching for a particular tall, green-skinned shape on the practice yard each morning, and feeling something unfamiliar and warm when he found her there. On the fourth morning, he brought her a cup of the strong dark tea he carried in his trade stores, the kind imported from the southern ports that most border keeps never saw, and set it on the low wall beside the practice yard without a word, then went about pretending to repair a wheel spoke on his cart nearby. She finished her forms, a brutal, beautiful sequence of strikes against a straw-stuffed post that was already sagging apart under her attention, before she even glanced at the cup. Then she picked it up, sniffed it, and looked at him with open suspicion. "What is this?" "Tea. Good tea. Better than anything Myrna brews, no offense to her intended." He kept his eyes on the wheel spoke, giving her room to refuse it without an audience to the refusal. "You looked like you could use something that wasn't well water." There was a long pause. He heard her drink it. "It is bitter," she said. "It grows on you. Everything you traders say sounds like a lie designed to sell something." He looked up then and found her watching him over the rim of the cup, and something about the directness of her gaze made his pulse do something foolish. "That one's true, though." "I promise." "Your promises are worth exactly what I decide they are worth, trader." But she did not hand the cup back empty-handed and walk away, as he'd half expected. She drank the rest of it slowly, watching him work on the wheel, and when she finally set the cup down on the wall again, she said, "Sharamph. Not orc woman, not warrior, Sharamph. I know your name. Then use it if you intend to keep bringing me tea I did not ask for." "Sharamph," he said, and something about the way she nodded, satisfied, told him he had passed some small test he hadn't known he was taking. That was how it began, not with a declaration, not with a battle, but with a cup of bitter southern tea and a name spoken correctly. Small things. But Wesley Fletcher had spent enough years on the road to know that the small things were usually the ones that mattered most. He should have left within the week. His business at Thornmere was long finished, his mule recovered from the tree line looking sheepish and unrepentant, his trade goods reorganized and ready for the road south. But when he told Captain Vane he intended to depart, the captain's face had gone grim in a way that made Wesley's stomach drop. "You'll want to reconsider that, Fletcher," Vane said, standing on the keep's outer wall and looking north along the coast road with a spyglass pressed to one eye. "We've had word from 3 villages up the coast. The Scarn clan is moving. Whole war band, maybe 200 strong, sweeping south along the shoreline, burning as they come. Thornmere sits square in their path, and there's nowhere else for them to go once they clear the northern headlands. The mountains box them onto this road." 200, Wesley repeated. "How many do you have here?" 43 able fighters, counting the woman. Vane lowered the spyglass. "You're a traitor. You know every back road and goat track between here and the southern border better than any man alive, or so your reputation says. I won't order you to stay, you're no soldier and no subject of mine. But if you leave now, you leave a garrison that could use every pair of hands it can get, and you leave without knowing whether the road south is even still open, because the Skarn will have scouts ranging wide of their main force. Wesley thought of his mule, his goods, the safe, quiet life of a man who traded needles and salt and never stood between anyone and a blade. He thought of Sharamph on the practice yard at dawn, moving like poetry made of muscle and purpose, utterly alone. "I'll stay," he said, and was faintly astonished to hear himself say it. The days that followed took on the frantic rhythm of a keep bracing for siege. Wesley found himself useful in ways he hadn't expected. His knowledge of the surrounding roads let him help scout escape routes and supply paths the garrison hadn't considered. His trader's eye for stores and provisions let him help Myrna stretch the keep's food further than she'd thought possible. His easy way with strangers made him valuable simply for the calm he brought to frightened villagers who'd fled inland to shelter behind Thornmere's walls. And every evening, when the work was done and the light was failing gold and red over the western sea, he found himself on the practice yard again, and so, more often than not, did Sharamph. Their first real conversation of substance happened on one such evening, 5 days before the Skarn warband was expected to reach the coast road. She was oiling her falchion's blade by lantern light, sitting on the low wall with her braid loose over one shoulder for once, and he sat down beside her, not too close, but closer than any of the garrison men would have dared, and did not ask permission. She glanced at him sideways. "You sit very close for a man who has watched me put 3 soldiers on the ground for standing too near without asking. You didn't put them on the ground for standing near. You put them on the ground for standing near and then treating you like something to be handled." He nodded toward the falchion. "I'm just sitting near a woman cleaning her sword, nothing to handle in that." Something flickered across her face, surprise maybe, or something warmer she was trying to bury under it. "You are an odd man, Fletcher. I've been told. Most men in this keep will not walk beside me on the wall path. Did you know that?" She said it lightly, but there was an old scar of hurt beneath the words, one she was clearly used to hiding. "They walk ahead to prove they lead. Or they walk behind to prove they are cautious of me, or afraid, or simply do not think a woman, an orc woman, merits being beside anyone. In 3 years at Thornmere, not one man has walked at my shoulder as though we were simply 2 people going the same direction." Wesley considered this for a long moment, watching the lantern light play gold along the edge of her blade. "That sounds lonely. I do not require company to be strong." "I didn't say you required it. I said it sounds lonely." "Those aren't the same thing." He met her eyes, steady, unafraid, though his heart was hammering harder than it had any right to over such a simple statement. "You can need nothing from anyone and still be lonely, Sharamph. I'd know. I've spent 10 years on the road with nothing but a mule for company, and it's a very fine mule, but it does not walk beside a man the way another person might." She was quiet for a long time after that, working the oil into the blade with slow, careful strokes. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost some of its usual edge. "Why do you keep bringing me tea and sitting near me and looking at me the way you look at me, trader? How do I look at you? Like I am not something to be feared or handled or avoided, like I am simply Sharamph." She turned to face him fully then, and the lantern light caught the fierce, uncertain hope in her eyes, an expression he suspected very few people had ever been permitted to see. "No one has looked at me that way since I was exiled from my clan. I do not know what to do with it." "You don't have to do anything with it," Wesley said quietly. "You can just let it be there." He did not kiss her that night. He wanted it with an intensity that surprised him, a pull in his chest he had never felt for any woman in all his years of wandering. But something in her eyes told him this was not a door to be pushed, only one to be left unlocked and waited beside. So instead he simply sat with her until the lantern burned low, and when he finally rose to go, she caught his wrist, not hard but firm, deliberate. "Fletcher." "Yes. Thank you for the tea," a pause, "and for the sitting near." "Any time, Sharamph," he smiled, and for once she did not look away from it, and he walked back to the trader's quarters with his heart doing something it had never done before in 10 years of solitary roads. 3 days before the Skarn warband was due, Captain Vane called a war council in the old refectory hall, the long stone room where monks had once eaten in silence, its high windows now shuttered against the coastal wind. Every able-bodied fighter crowded around the great table, along with the village elders who had fled to Thornmere's walls for shelter, and Wesley found himself standing near the back, watching Sharamph stand near the front, arms crossed, radiating a barely contained impatience with the slow pace of the discussion. "We hold the gate and the outer wall," Vane was saying, tracing lines on a rough map with a charred stick. "The cliff face protects our northern flank entirely, no force can scale it, not even the Scarn. That leaves the coast road as the only approach, which we can bottleneck at the switchback, if we can hold there." "If we hold there, we die there," Sharamph interrupted, stepping forward to the table with the easy authority of someone used to being listened to, even if grudgingly. 200 warriors against 43, however good the ground. The switchback slows them, it does not stop them. We need more than good ground, Captain. We need them to believe attacking us costs more than they are willing to pay. And how do you propose we convince 200 raiders of that, Ironblood?" This from Garrick, a broad-shouldered sergeant who had never much liked taking counsel from her, though he'd learned not to challenge her blade directly. Words, a strongly worded letter. A ripple of tension went through the room. Wesley saw Sharamph's jaw tighten, saw her hand twitch toward the hilt at her hip out of old habit rather than real intent. "A demonstration," she said, voice flat and cold. "The Scarn clan respects strength above all things. If their scouts see this keep is held by warriors who cannot be easily broken, if they see it before the main force ever arrives, some among them will counsel caution. Raiding parties do not like costly sieges when easier prey exists elsewhere along the coast. And who's meant to provide this demonstration?" Garrick pressed. "You, alone, against however many scouts they send ahead, if necessary. That's madness." "That's experience," she snapped back. "I know how the Scarn thinks, Sergeant, because I was raised among a clan that thought the same way before I was cast out of it. You were raised in a farming village that has never once faced a true warband. I do not require your permission to know my own people." The room had gone very quiet. Wesley watched something raw and old move behind Sharamph's eyes, the wound of exile, still fresh even after 3 years, and found himself stepping forward before he'd fully decided to. "She's right," he said, and every head in the room turned toward him, several with open surprise that the peddler had spoken at all. "I've traded along this coast for a decade. I've heard the stories about the Scarn clan same as anyone. They test their targets before committing the whole warband. Send scouts ahead, probe the defenses, look for weakness. If those scouts report back that Thornmere is soft, the whole force comes down on us at once, and Sharamph's right, we don't survive that. But if the scouts report back that we're a hard target, that we've got fighters who can take a scouting party apart without losing a man ourselves, there's a real chance a good portion of that warband decides easier prey lies elsewhere." "And what would a trader know of warbands and scouting parties?" Garrick asked, not unkindly, just skeptical. "I know roads, Sergeant. I know which villages get hit twice a season by raiders and which never get touched at all, and it's never about which ones have more soldiers. It's about which ones look like more trouble than they're worth." Wesley met Sharamph's eyes across the table and found her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read, surprise perhaps, that he'd stood up in a room full of soldiers to back her word with his own. "I believe her. I think you should too." Captain Vane studied the two of them for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Ironblood, if you intend to make this demonstration, you will not make it alone. I'll send Garrick and 4 others with you to the northern approach at first light tomorrow. I did not ask what you need, Ironblood. I am your captain, and I am telling you that you will take a party of 5. Vane's voice brooked no argument, and for once, Sharamph did not press the point, though her jaw remained tight with old frustration at being doubted even now, even after 3 years of proving herself. The council broke up not long after, soldiers dispersing to their posts and villagers to whatever shelter they'd claimed within the walls. Wesley found Sharamph outside on the old cloister walk, the covered walkway that ringed the keep's inner courtyard, pacing with restless energy under the darkening sky. "You did not need to speak for me in there," she said as he approached, though there was no real heat in it. "I know I didn't need to. I wanted to." He fell into step beside her, not behind, not ahead, and he saw her notice it, saw the flicker of something complicated cross her face at the simple fact of it. "You were right about the scarn. I've seen it work that way up and down this coast for years. Villages that show teeth get left alone more often than villages that beg. Most men do not believe an orc woman's counsel is worth defending in front of other men. I'm not most men." "No," she said, slowing her pace to match his more thoughtfully. "You are not. I am beginning to understand that, Fletcher, and I do not entirely know what to do with the understanding." They walked the length of the cloister in silence after that, shoulder to shoulder, and Wesley thought that if he died on that coast road in the coming days, he would at least die having walked beside Sharamph Ironblood as an equal, which was more than most men at Thornmere Keep could claim, and more than he had ever expected to find on any road he'd traveled. The scouting party left before dawn, Sharamph, Garrick, and 3 other soldiers, moving north along the cliff trail toward the headland where the scarn's advance scouts had last been sighted. Wesley wanted badly to go with them, but he had no sword skill worth the name, and Sharamph had made it plain the night before, with a directness that had cut through his pride more gently than he'd expected, that his usefulness lay elsewhere. "You know the roads, Fletcher, and the keep needs its stores organized for a siege that may last weeks. That is not a lesser task. Do not let your pride tell you it is." She had touched his arm then, briefly, the first time she had initiated any touch between them, and the warmth of it had lingered on his skin long after she'd walked away toward the armory. He spent the day it took them to scout the headland in a state of restless, useless worry, helping Myrna inventory the grain stores, and helping the village elders organize sleeping arrangements for the refugees crowding into the keep's outer buildings. But his mind kept drifting north along the cliff trail, imagining every possible disaster. They returned at dusk, all 5 of them, and Wesley felt something in his chest unclench so violently he had to grip the wall of the gatehouse to steady himself. Sharamph's leathers were spattered with blood that was not thankfully her own, and there was a long shallow cut along one forearm that she wore like it was nothing at all, but she was alive and whole, and when her eyes found his across the courtyard, something in her face softened in a way he'd never seen before. "We found their scouts," Garrick reported to Captain Vane, sounding shaken in a way the hardened sergeant rarely allowed himself to sound. 8 of them, ranging ahead of the main force. Ironblood took 3 of them alone before the rest of us even closed the distance. The remaining 5 fled north. They'll report back to the warband by morning." "And what will they report?" Vane asked. "That Thornmere is not worth the cost," Sharamph said, stepping forward, wiping her blade clean with a cloth as she spoke, "or that Thornmere has already lost 3 of its best fighters and is ripe for the taking. I do not know which conclusion they will draw. We will learn soon enough." Wesley crossed the courtyard to her before he fully considered whether it was appropriate and reached for her wounded arm without asking, examining the cut with a frown. "This needs cleaning." "It is nothing." "It's not nothing. It's your arm, and you're going to let me clean it or I'm going to worry about it all night, and I don't imagine you want that on your conscience." He said it lightly, but there was real concern underneath, and she looked at him for a long moment before relenting with something that was almost a smile. "You are very stubborn for a man who sells needles. You have no idea." He cleaned and bound the wound himself in the quiet of the infirmary, his hands careful and gentle in a way that made something in her chest ache with unfamiliar tenderness, and when he finished, he did not immediately let go of her arm. The lantern light between them was low and warm, and the room was very quiet, and for a moment neither of them spoke at all. "Sharamph," he said finally, quietly, "I was frightened today." All day until I saw you come back through that gate. I don't think I've ever been frightened like that for anyone before. You should not fear for me, Fletcher. I have survived worse than 8 scouts. I know you have. That doesn't make the fear less real. He looked up and found her watching him with an intensity that stole his breath. I'm not trying to say you need protecting. I know you don't. I'm saying I care what happens to you, and that scared me more than the raiders did. Something in her face broke open then, some old wall finally cracking under the weight of his honesty, and she reached up and cupped his jaw in one large, calloused hand, tilting his face up toward hers with a gentleness that seemed at odds with everything he'd seen her do with that same hand in battle. No one has said such a thing to me since I left my clan, she murmured. I do not know if I believe it yet, but I want to. Then let me prove it. Not today, not in one conversation. Just let me keep showing you. She was quiet for a long moment, her thumb tracing an absent line along his jaw, and then she leaned down and kissed him, not tentative, not testing but full and deliberate, acclaiming as much as an invitation, and Wesley Fletcher felt the whole of his careful, solitary life reorganize itself around the shape of her mouth against his. When she finally pulled back, both of them breathing unsteadily, she pressed her forehead briefly against his and said, low and rough, "You will not run from this, Fletcher. Tell me now if you intend to run and spare us both." "I have never run from anything I wanted this badly in my whole life," he said, and meant it with everything he had. The following days brought a strange, charged peace to Thornmere, the peace of a garrison that knows a storm is coming, and has decided to meet it standing rather than cowering. Wesley and Sharamph found excuses to be near each other constantly now. Their earlier careful distance collapsed entirely into an easy, magnetic closeness that the whole keep noticed, and mostly approved of, though a few of the older soldiers muttered about propriety and species and the strangeness of the pairing. Sharamph, for her part, had never cared less what anyone muttered. "Let them talk," she told him one evening on the cliff path, her hand finding his in the darkness without hesitation, an easy intimacy that would have been unthinkable between them just 2 weeks prior. "I have spent my whole life being what other people expected an orc woman to be, feared, or exiled, or used as a blade and nothing more. I am done shaping myself around their comfort." "I never wanted you to shape yourself around anything," Wesley said, lacing his fingers through hers. "I like you exactly as fierce and impossible as you are." "Impossible," she repeated, amused. "Is that what I am to you?" "The most impossible, magnificent thing I've ever encountered on any road I've traveled. And believe me, I've traveled a great many roads." She laughed then, a real laugh, warm and unguarded, a sound he suspected very few people at Thornmere had ever heard from her, and he thought his heart might simply give out from the privilege of having caused it. 2 days later, the Skarn warband's advance riders were sighted on the northern headland, and the peace shattered entirely. The alarm bell rang out across Thornmere Keep in the gray light of early morning, and within minutes, the entire garrison was scrambling to positions along the outer wall, while villagers herded children and livestock deeper into the keep's inner courtyard. Wesley found himself pressed into service alongside Myrna and 2 other older villagers, distributing what weapons could be spared to those who had never held a blade before, kitchen knives lashed to broom handles, a rusted old spear someone had found in a storeroom, anything that might make a farmer's wife feel less helpless in the face of what was coming. From the outer wall, he could see the approaching mass of the Skarn warband spreading along the coast road like a dark stain, banners of black and bone-white snapping in the wind, and his stomach dropped at the sheer scale of it. 200, Vane had estimated. Looking at that host now, Wesley believed every word of it. Sharamph stood at the center of the wall's defenders, her falchion drawn, her expression a mask of cold readiness that he'd never seen on her before, the face, he realized, of the warrior she must have been before Thornmere, before exile, before him. It frightened him a little, and thrilled him more than he wanted to admit. The Skarn force halted at the base of the switchback trail, well out of arrow range, and for a long, taut hour, nothing happened at all. Then a single rider broke from the mass and approached alone, unarmed, calling up toward the walls in the guttural trade tongue that both humans and orcs along the border understood. "They want a parley," Sharamph translated, frowning. "Their warlord wishes to speak with whoever commands this keep." Captain Vane climbed to the wall's edge, and beside him, unbidden, Sharamph climbed as well, and Wesley watched her plant herself at Vane's shoulder with the absolute certainty of someone who had earned her place there through blood and skill, daring anyone to suggest otherwise. No one did. The Skarn rider called up again, and this time Sharamph's whole body went rigid. "What did he say?" Wesley asked, having climbed partway up the wall stair himself, unable to stay away despite having no real business there. "He named their warlord," Sharamph said, voice tight. "Grosh Bloodfang. He was my clan's second-in-command when I was exiled. He knows my name. He is asking if the traitor Ironblood still lives, because if she commands this keep's defense, he says, he will enjoy correcting an old mistake. An old mistake. The mistake of letting me leave the clan alive, rather than killing me for the crime I was exiled for." Her jaw was tight, her eyes fixed on the distant rider with an intensity that bordered on hatred. "I did not tell you the full truth of my exile, Fletcher. I told you I was cast out. I did not tell you why. You don't have to tell me now if you don't want to." "I want to." She turned to face him, ignoring the soldiers around them, ignoring everything except the need to say this while she still had the courage to say it. "I refused an order to burn a human village that had done nothing to provoke the clan, simply because Grosh wished to prove our strength to a rival warband. I would not do it. I struck him when he tried to force me, and for that I was exiled rather than executed, because even Grosh could not deny before the whole clan that I had beaten him fairly in the challenge that followed. He has hated me every day since. This siege, I believe now it is not chance that brought the Skarn to this coast road. I believe he has hunted for me for 3 years, and finally found where I hid myself." Wesley absorbed this with a slow, dawning understanding of just how much danger she had walked into by staying at Thornmere at all, and how much courage it must have taken to remain rather than run further still. "Then this fight was always going to find you eventually." "Yes. I'm glad it found you here, with people who'll stand beside you instead of behind you." Something in her face cracked open with gratitude too large for words, and she reached out and gripped his hand once, hard, before turning back to the wall to answer the waiting rider in a voice that rang out clear and unafraid across the whole valley below. "Tell Grosh Bloodfang that the traitor Ironblood lives and stands ready to correct his mistake herself, whenever he finds the courage to face her blade instead of hiding behind 200 warriors who do not know they are dying for his wounded pride." The rider wheeled and rode back to the warband, and Captain Vane rounded on Sharamph with something between alarm and grudging awe. "Ironblood, was that wise? Wisdom will not save this keep, Captain. Only strength or a very good bluff, and I have given them both at once." But Wesley saw her hands trembling faintly at her sides once she thought no one was watching closely, and he understood that whatever mask of cold readiness she wore for the garrison, the woman beneath it was afraid, and that fear was for more than herself. It was for all of them. The Skarn attacked at dawn the following day, and the fighting that followed was the fiercest thing Wesley Fletcher had ever witnessed in his life. The switchback trail did its work exactly as Vane had hoped, bottlenecking the warband's advance into a narrow column that the garrison's archers could rake with volley after volley from the walls above. Wesley found himself in the thick of the support effort, hauling water and spare arrows to the wall's defenders, helping drag wounded soldiers back from the fighting line, his hands shaking with adrenaline he'd never had cause to feel before in his quiet trading life. Sharamph fought at the gate itself, where the fighting was thickest, and Wesley caught glimpses of her between his own frantic tasks, a green-skinned whirlwind of controlled violence, cutting down every Skarn warrior who broke through the gate's defenses, her falchion moving almost too fast to follow. The garrison held through the morning, through the afternoon, through a brief lull as the Skarn regrouped at the base of the trail to lick their wounds and reconsider their approach. It was during that lull that disaster struck. A second force of Skarn riders' scouts who had circled wide around the headland during the night, exactly the kind of flanking maneuver Sharamph had warned about in the War Council, appeared suddenly on the cliff path behind the keep, a path everyone had believed too narrow and too dangerous for any real force to use. They had come not for the main gate, but for the postern door on the keep's eastern side, the smaller entrance used by fishing parties to reach the rocky cove below, and they had come specifically, Wesley realized with cold horror, because someone among the Skarn scouts had learned that the postern was where the keep's noncombatants, the elderly, the very young among the refugee families, and the trader who'd been ferrying wounded to the infirmary, could be found with the least resistance. Wesley was caught in the open courtyard between the postern and the infirmary when the Skarn riders burst through, 6 of them, cutting down the 2 guards stationed at the smaller gate before anyone could raise a proper alarm. He had no weapon but the water skin in his hands and a belt knife better suited to cutting rope than fighting men, and for one horrible frozen moment, he understood that he was almost certainly about to die, and that he would not even manage to slow them down long enough to protect the frightened villagers sheltering in the buildings behind him. Then Sharamph was there. She had heard the commotion from the main gate and crossed the entire width of the keep in what felt like seconds, vaulting a low wall with the same terrifying speed she'd shown on the cliff road the day they'd met. And she put herself bodily between Wesley and the charging riders with no hesitation at all, no calculation of odds, simply the absolute certainty that this was where she needed to be. "Get behind me," she snarled, and for the first time since he'd known her, Wesley did exactly as he was told without a single word of argument, because he understood in that moment that this was not about pride or precedence. This was about her ferocious need to keep him alive, and his understanding that he could not help her by doing anything other than trusting her completely. What followed was carnage of the most beautiful, terrible kind. Sharamph fought all 6 riders essentially alone, in the tight confines of the courtyard, using the narrow space to her advantage in a way that turned the Skarn's numerical advantage into a liability. She took a shallow cut along one shoulder that would have ended a lesser fighter, absorbed it with barely a flinch, and kept moving, kept cutting, until 4 of the 6 riders lay dead or dying on the courtyard stones, and the remaining 2 turned to flee back through the postern gate they'd broken. She did not let them go. She ran them down before they reached the cliff path, and Wesley, watching from where he'd finally found the courage to grab a fallen soldier's spear and guard the infirmary door in case any others came, saw her return moments later, breathing hard, blood-spattered, alive. He crossed the courtyard to her at a run, and did not care who saw him pull her into his arms, crushing her against his chest with a desperation born of the fear he'd felt watching her fight 6 armed riders alone to protect him and everyone sheltering behind him. "You could have died," he said into her hair, his voice cracking. "Sharamph, you could have." "I did not." She pulled back enough to look at him, and her expression was fierce and unguarded and full of something that stole the breath from his lungs. "I told you once that I do not require protecting, Fletcher, and that remains true. But I will not stand by while anyone threatens you. That is not weakness in me. That is the truest strength I possess, the choosing of what I will not allow to be taken from me. I'm not yours to protect that fiercely," he managed. "I'm just a trader. You are not just anything to me anymore, and you know it." She cupped his face in both hands now, ignoring the blood on her own, ignoring the chaos still echoing from the main gate where the siege continued. "I have fought beside soldiers for 3 years at this keep, Fletcher, and not one of them has ever made me feel what I feel when I fight to keep you breathing. Do not tell me you are just a traitor. You are the reason I did not hesitate for even a heartbeat when I heard those riders in the courtyard." He kissed her then, hard and desperate and entirely uncaring of the blood and dust and chaos around them. And when they broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, a runner arrived from the main gate with news that changed everything again. "Captain Vane wants Ironblood back at the wall," the young soldier gasped, clearly having sprinted the whole distance. "Grosh Bloodfang has called for single combat. He says he'll withdraw the whole warband if Ironblood faces him alone and loses, but if she refuses, he'll order a full assault at nightfall that the garrison cannot survive." Sharamph's face went very still. "And if I face him and win, he says he'll honor the old clan law. If you defeat him in single combat, the Skarn withdraw entirely and never trouble this coast again, because a warlord who loses such a challenge forfeits his claim to lead." "It's a trap," Wesley said immediately, cold dread pooling in his stomach. "He's had 3 years to plan revenge on you. Why would he offer you a fair fight now?" "Because pride will not let him do otherwise in front of his whole warband," Sharamph said slowly. "He named me traitor, but he has never been able to say he defeated me himself. If I refuse the challenge now, in front of 200 of his own warriors, he loses face regardless of whether the siege succeeds. Grosh Bloodfang would rather win against me honestly than win a siege through numbers alone. His pride demands it. So you'll fight him." "I will fight him." She looked at Wesley then, and something vulnerable passed behind her fierce eyes. "I ask you one thing, Fletcher. Do not try to stop me, and do not look away when I go to the wall to answer him. Whatever comes of this, I want you there. I want to see your face when I face him." "I'll be there," Wesley said, throat tight. "Every step of the way. Beside you, not behind you, and not ahead of you. That's where I intend to stay." She kissed him once more, fierce and brief, and then she turned and strode back toward the main gate with her falchion in hand, and Wesley followed at her shoulder, exactly as he'd promised, all the way to the wall where Captain Vane waited with a face full of grim uncertainty. The gate was opened, and Sharamph Ironblood walked out onto the open ground before Thornmere Keep to face the warlord who had hunted her for 3 years, and Wesley Fletcher walked out beside her, refusing every attempt by Captain Vane to hold him back, because he had promised her he would be there, and he intended to keep that promise even though every instinct in his body screamed at him to run. Grosh Bloodfang was a mountain of an orc, taller than Sharamph by a full head, scarred across one cheek and missing 2 fingers on his sword hand from some old battle, and he laughed when he saw Wesley walking at her shoulder. "You bring a human pet to watch you die, Ironblood. How the mighty have fallen since your exile. He is not my pet, Grosh. He is the reason I no longer fear men like you." Sharamph's voice was ice-cold, utterly steady, and Wesley felt a fierce swell of pride at the sound of it. "You exiled me because you feared what I might become once free of your clan's cruelty. Look at what I became anyway. Pretty words. Let us see if your blade still matches them." Grosh drew a massive war axe from his back, and the watching Skarn warband drew back to form a wide circle, and the fight began. It was the most brutal single combat Wesley had ever witnessed, and he stood at the edge of that circle with his heart in his throat, forcing himself to watch every terrible moment of it exactly as he'd promised. Grosh Bloodfang fought with brute strength and years of experience, his war axe crashing against Sharamph's falchion with blows that should have shattered a lesser blade. Sharamph fought with the speed and precision that had made her the finest warrior Thornmere had ever known, dancing around his heavier strikes, landing cuts that drew blood again and again, while somehow avoiding the killing blows he aimed at her. The fight went on for what felt like an eternity, both combatants bleeding, both breathing hard, and Wesley watched with growing horror as Grosh finally landed a solid blow that sent Sharamph staggering, her falchion nearly torn from her grip, blood streaming from a gash along her ribs. Sharamph. The name tore from his throat before he could stop it, and for one terrible moment he thought he had doomed her, that any distraction, even his voice, might cost her the fight. But instead, something in his voice seemed to steady her, to remind her of exactly what she was fighting for beyond mere survival or pride, and she found some final reserve of strength that let her plant her feet and meet Grosh's next charging blow, not with a dodge, but with a direct, brutal parry that sent his war axe spinning from his ruined grip. She had him on his knees a heartbeat later, her falchion at his throat, and the entire watching warband went utterly silent. "Yield," she demanded, "or die knowing your own warriors watched you fail to correct your precious old mistake." Grosh Bloodfang, staring death in the face, chose the only path his shattered pride could accept. "I yield. The challenge is yours, Ironblood. The Skarn withdraw by the old law." She let him live. Wesley would learn later that this too was part of the old clan law, that killing a yielded opponent in formal challenge was itself dishonorable, and stepped back, breathing hard, blood-soaked and victorious. And the assembled Skarn warband began, with visible reluctance but absolute obedience to their own ancient customs, to withdraw from the coast road entirely. Wesley reached her before she'd even fully lowered her blade, catching her as her knees finally buckled from exhaustion and blood loss, and he half-carried her back through the gate of Thornmere Keep, while the entire garrison erupted into stunned, relieved cheering behind them. She spent 3 days recovering in the infirmary, and Wesley did not leave her side for more than an hour at a time during any of them, tending her wounds with the same careful gentleness he'd shown that first night after the scouting mission, feeding her broth when her strength was too low to hold a spoon steady, and simply sitting beside her bed in comfortable silence when neither of them needed words at all. On the third evening, with her wounds mostly closed and her strength largely returned, she caught his hand as he changed the bandage along her ribs and held it there, against her skin, over the beat of her heart. "You stayed at my shoulder through the entire challenge," she said quietly. "Grosh mocked you for it, called you my pet. You did not flinch. I wasn't going to let his words chase me off after I promised you I'd be there. No man has ever stood at my shoulder like that, Fletcher. Not once in my entire life, human or orc. They walk ahead of me to claim they lead, or behind me to claim caution or fear. You are the only one who has ever simply walked beside me, as though we were equals going the same direction, exactly as I told you I wish someone would that first night on the wall." Her grip on his hand tightened. "I did not believe until I met you that such a thing was possible for someone like me to have. I do not intend to let it go now that I have found it." "You don't have to let it go," Wesley said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm not going anywhere, Sharamph. Not now, not after everything. I've spent 10 years wandering roads alone because I never found anything worth staying still for. I've found it now. Even knowing what I am, what I have done, what I might yet have to do if the Skarn or any other threat comes for this coast again. Especially knowing all of that, I don't want the version of you that hides what she is to make anyone comfortable. I want the warrior who tore through 6 riders to protect a peddler who can barely hold a knife properly. I want the woman who walked out to face a warlord twice her size without a flicker of doubt in her voice. I want all of you, Sharamph Ironblood, exactly as fierce and impossible as you've always been." She pulled him down to her then, careful of her healing wounds but not remotely careful of her own need, and kissed him with a hunger that had clearly been building far longer than either of them had admitted. And when they finally broke apart, both breathless, she pressed her forehead to his and spoke words in the old orc tongue that he did not understand. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It is an old claiming word," she said softly, "from before my exile. My clan spoke it when a warrior chose a mate they intended to keep beside them for the whole of their life, through every hardship that followed. I did not think I would ever have cause to speak it again, after I was cast out." She met his eyes, vulnerable in a way he had never seen from her before. "I am speaking it now to you, if you will have it. It means, you walk at my side and I will not let you fall." Wesley felt something in his chest crack open with a joy so complete it nearly hurt. "I'll have it," he said. "I'll have anything you want to give me, Sharamph, for as long as you want to give it." "Then it is done," she said, fierce and certain. "And I do not intend to ever let you fall, Wesley Fletcher. exactly as you have never once let me feel I was walking alone since the day you brought me bitter tea and refused to be afraid of me." The weeks that followed brought a kind of peace to Thornmere Keep that the old monastery had perhaps not known since the monks first departed it generations before. Word of the Scarn's withdrawal spread quickly along the coast road, and with it, word of the orc woman who had defeated a warlord in single combat to protect a garrison of humans who had once feared her, and the human traitor who had stood at her shoulder through the whole ordeal, refusing to walk anywhere but beside her. The story took on a life of its own as it traveled, embellished in some tellings, understated in others, but the core of it remained true in every version, and Wesley found himself, for the first time in his 10 years of wandering trade roads, genuinely reluctant to leave a place once his business there was finished. So he simply did not leave. He sold what remained of his trade goods to Myrna and the keep stores, retired his cart to a corner of the courtyard where it gathered dust and the occasional curious chicken, and settled into a life at Thornmere that he had never once imagined for himself in all his years alone on the road. Sharamph continued to train each dawn on the practice yard, and Wesley continued to bring her tea, though now he stayed to drink his own cup beside her rather than retreating to pretend at wheel repairs. The garrison, having witnessed her defeat a warlord to protect the keep and its people, no longer hesitated to walk beside her when duty required it, and though she remained the fiercest warrior Thornmere had ever known, the old loneliness that had shadowed her for 3 years had visibly lifted, replaced by an ease and warmth that made her, if anything, more formidable rather than less, a warrior who fought not from isolation, but from the fierce certainty that she had something precious to protect and someone precious protecting her in turn. On a clear autumn evening some 2 months after the siege, with the sea turned gold and copper beneath a setting sun and the wind for once gentle along the cliff tops, Wesley found Sharamph on the old cloister walk where they had first walked together as equals, and he took her hand without hesitation, exactly as had become their habit, and led her out through the keep's gate to the cliff path beyond. "Where are we going?" she asked, though she came willingly, her fingers laced through his. "Nowhere in particular. I just wanted to walk with you while the light was like this." He glanced sideways at her, at the way the gold evening light caught the strong planes of her face, the fierce intelligence in her eyes, the small easy smile she wore now more often than the guarded expression she'd greeted him with that first day on the cliff road. "I've walked a great many roads in my life, Sharamph, alone mostly. I always told myself I preferred it that way, fewer complications, fewer people to worry about losing. And now I can't imagine walking any road without you beside me. I don't want to imagine it." He stopped walking and turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "I love you. I don't know if I've said the words plainly enough since that night in the infirmary, but I mean them with everything I have. I love the woman who defeated a warlord without flinching, and I love the woman who cried once quietly when she thought I was asleep, telling me about the clan that cast her out. I love all of you, Sharamph Ironblood, and I want to spend whatever years I have left walking exactly where I am right now, beside you, not behind, not ahead, just beside, for as long as you'll allow it." Sharamph's fierce composure cracked entirely then, tears standing bright in her eyes though her voice remained steady with certainty. "I told you once, Fletcher, that I had spoken an old claiming word to you and meant it. I do not offer such things lightly, and I have never once regretted offering it to you. I love you. I did not believe, before you came stumbling up my cliff road with your cart in ruins and your hat shot clean off your head, that anyone would ever look at me and see something worth walking beside rather than something to be feared or used or left alone. You saw it from the very first day. You have never once stopped seeing it. I never will," Wesley promised and pulled her into his arms, and she came willingly, fitting against him in a way that felt, after everything, entirely inevitable. "Stay with me then," she murmured against his shoulder. "Not as a traitor passing through, not as a guest tolerated at Thornmere's tables. Stay as mine, Wesley Fletcher, exactly as I intend to remain yours for however long this world grants us. There's nowhere else I'd rather be, he said, and no one else I'd rather stand beside. The sun finished its slow descent into the sea as they stood together on the cliff path. The old keep behind them lit gold by the last of the evening light, the sound of the waves far below a constant, steady rhythm against the rocks. Sharamph Ironblood, who had spent 3 years walking alone through a world that feared her strength and doubted her worth, and Wesley Fletcher, who had spent 10 years wandering roads alone because he had never found anything worth the risk of staying, stood together at the edge of the world they had chosen to build, and neither of them walked ahead, and neither of them walked behind. They simply walked together, exactly as they had chosen to, exactly as they intended to for the whole of the life still waiting ahead of them. And for the first time in either of their lives, neither one of them felt even the smallest trace of being alone.